I came home after 10 hours on my feet to find 6 people sitting in my living room like they'd always lived there. My husband's aunt was already in the kitchen. I could hear the cabinets opening. I smiled at everyone, that specific smile women learn young, the one that costs nothing and means nothing. Walked to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. I had eaten a sandwich in my car 40 minutes ago. I had absolutely no intention of cooking for anyone. What happened over the next 3 weeks would cost me my marriage, my patience, and every last illusion I had carried about the kind of man I had chosen. What I got in exchange was something I hadn't known I needed, the absolute, unshakable understanding of exactly how much I was worth, and the willingness, finally, to act accordingly. But let me begin where it actually began, not with the 6 relatives in my living room, but with the woman I was before that Tuesday evening, the woman who had been quietly disappearing into her own life for 2 years without fully realizing it. My name is Clara. I am 34 years old, and until 22 months ago, I had what most people would describe as a good life. I was a pediatric occupational therapist at a children's rehabilitation center, work I had trained for 7 years to do and that I genuinely loved, the specific, difficult, sustaining love of a job that matters. I owned a 2-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized city, bought with my own savings at 31, on a quiet street with a bakery on one corner and a pharmacy on the other, and a park 3 blocks east where I ran on mornings when I had the energy. The apartment had good light, west-facing windows that turned the living room amber in the late afternoon, and I had furnished it slowly and deliberately, the way you do when you're doing it alone, and every piece is chosen because you actually want it there. I had met Marcus at a friend's birthday dinner 2.5 years earlier. He was a civil engineer, tall, considered in the way of someone who thinks before he speaks, with a dry humor that appeared gradually, like something he was deciding to trust you with. We dated for 8 months before he suggested we move in together, into my apartment since his lease was ending and mine was larger, and I had agreed, with the particular warm confidence of a woman who has waited long enough for the right person and believes she has finally found him. We married 13 months after that. Small wedding, 60 guests, my aunt's garden in late September. Marcus cried a little during the vows. I thought that meant something. His family was large, and I had known this going in. His parents lived an hour away. He had 2 brothers, both married, both with children. He had aunts and cousins and family friends who functioned as cousins, and they operated as a unit in the way of certain families, loud, overlapping, present, constantly moving in and out of each other's lives with the casual intimacy of people who have never learned to separate. I had grown up in a quieter family, the only child of 2 people who loved each other but kept their world small, and Marcus's family had seemed, initially, like abundance, all that warmth, all that noise, all those people who welcomed me into their group with embraces and opinions and homemade food pressed into my hands at every gathering. What I hadn't understood, what I understood only slowly, incrementally, the way you understand that a room is getting colder, not when the temperature drops, but when you finally notice you've been holding your arms across your chest for an hour, was that welcoming me into the group and respecting the boundaries of my home were, for them, entirely unrelated propositions. The first time Marcus's brother and his wife came to stay for a long weekend, I had been informed 2 days before. The second time, 1 day before. The third time, I found out when I came home to find their car in my parking spot. By the 4th visit, I had stopped expecting notice at all. I raised it with Marcus each time, calmly, specifically, the way Patricia would later tell me I raised everything, with care and precision and ultimately insufficient force. He apologized each time. He said he'd talk to them. He said they were family. They didn't think of it as imposing. He'd make sure it didn't happen again. And each time, it happened again, slightly worse than before, the way these things always do when there are no real consequences. I want to be specific about what slightly worse looked like in practice, because the tendency when describing this kind of accumulation is to sound petty, to sound like someone cataloging grievances too small to justify the feelings they produced. So let me be specific. Marcus's mother used my kitchen without asking and left it in a state I would not have left a stranger's kitchen. His aunt rearranged the bathroom cabinet. "To make more room, darling, you had it so cluttered," without mentioning it, so that for 3 days I couldn't find my own medication. His brother's children drew on the wall in the hallway with a ballpoint pen, and when I pointed it out, gently, to their mother, she laughed and said, "Kids'll be kids," and then told Marcus I had been cold to her. Marcus reported this to me later, carefully, in the way of someone relaying information they hope you'll take as constructive. I took it as constructive. I softened my manner. I drew the boundaries smaller. I told myself this was what marriage looked like when you married into a big family, that the discomfort was mine to manage, that love required adjustment and flexibility and the willingness to hold your own needs loosely. None of this was true. But I believed it for long enough to let the apartment, my apartment, with its amber afternoon light and its carefully chosen furniture and the park 3 blocks east, become something I was hosting in rather than living in. And then came the Tuesday in November with the 6 relatives in the living room. I had had a genuinely hard day. One of my young patients, a 6-year-old with cerebral palsy named Ethan, who had been working with me for 14 months, had had a setback that required a significant adjustment to his treatment plan, which meant a difficult conversation with his parents, which meant 2 hours of paperwork after the conversation was done. I had left the center at 6:15, bought a tuna sandwich from the cafe on the ground floor, and eaten it in my car before driving home, because I knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who has been in this situation enough times to have developed instincts about it, that I should not arrive home hungry. I parked, climbed 3 flights, put my key in my lock, opened my door. The couch held Marcus's cousin Dimitri and his wife Lena. Dimitri's mother, Marcus's Aunt Galina, was in the armchair I had carried up 3 flights myself when I bought it, upholstered in a fabric I'd spent 2 weeks choosing. 2 of Lena and Dimitri's children, 7 and 9, both boys, were on the floor in front of the television, which was on at a volume I would not have chosen. Marcus's younger brother, Pyotr, was in the kitchen doorway holding a beer. Marcus was on the smaller sofa, and he looked up at me when I came in, with an expression I had learned to read precisely over 2 years of marriage. It was the expression of a man who knows he has done something wrong, and is betting on your decency not to make it visible. "Clara," he stood, "you're home. Come in, come in. Look who's here." I looked. I smiled. The smile was automatic, the one that cost nothing. Galina rose to kiss my cheek, and I let her. And Lena waved from the couch and said something about being in the neighborhood, and the children did not look up from the television. And Pyotr lifted his beer in a kind of greeting from the kitchen doorway. The kitchen, I noticed, had the beginning smell of something being cooked. Onions, something heavy, something that was going to take at least an hour. "I'm just going to change," I said pleasantly. I walked to the bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in the half-dark and took off my shoes and held them in my lap for a moment. The television was audible through the wall. The smell of onions was stronger than I would have liked. I had eaten. I was tired. I had spent the last 3 hours managing other people's pain and distress professionally and competently, and I had nothing left, absolutely nothing, for the performance required of the woman who has just come home to find 6 uninvited relatives installed in her living room and is expected to be delighted about it. I put my shoes neatly by the wardrobe. I changed into comfortable clothes. I opened my nightstand drawer and took out the novel I was in the middle of. I got into bed, propped the pillow against the headboard, and began to read. Marcus came in 14 minutes later. I know because I had been watching the clock with a specific, detached interest in my own patients. "Hey," he said. He'd closed the door behind him. "You okay?" "Fine," I said. I turned a page. "Are you coming out?" I looked up from the book. "No," I said. "Clara, Marcus." I set the book down, keeping my thumb in the page. "When did you know they were coming?" A pause. "This afternoon." "This afternoon," I said, "so you had several hours during which you could have called me." "I know, I should have. And instead you let me come home to find 6 people in our living room at 6:30 in the evening after a 10-hour shift." I picked the book back up. "I've eaten. I'm going to read. You're welcome to join me." "There are guests." "There are your guests," I said. "I didn't invite them." He stood in the doorway for a moment. I could feel him there, hovering in that particular way of a man who wants to argue but can't find the argument. And then he went back out and closed the door, and I listened to the muffled sounds of the living room settle back into themselves, and I read my book. I want to be clear. This was not the fight. This was not the moment when everything broke open. This was just a woman, very tired, reading a book in her own bedroom. The fight was still coming. What that evening was a line, the first line I had drawn without immediately walking back across it. And I felt, turning pages in the amber lamplight while onions fried in my kitchen without my permission, something shifting in me that I didn't yet have words for. The relatives left around 10. I heard them go, the children rounded up, the coats, the goodbyes in the hallway, Marcus's voice, low and cheerful, and Galina's, and then the door. Then quiet. He came back to the bedroom, and I was still reading. He got ready for bed without speaking and lay down beside me, and for a long while neither of us said anything. Then he said, "You were rude." I turned a page. "I was tired," I said, "and I was hungry, and I wasn't told. They're family." "So you keep saying." Another silence. Then, "What did you want me to do? Tell them not to come?" "Yes," I said, "or at minimum call me, or ask me, or acknowledge that this is also my home, and I get a say in who is in it." I closed the book. Pick any of those. Pick all of them. What I didn't want was to walk into my living room after the day I had and find a dinner party I didn't know about in progress. "You didn't even try," he said. "You just walked away." "I'd already eaten," I said. He turned the lamp off without responding. I lay in the dark and thought, this isn't about the food. He knows it isn't about the food. And the fact that he's pretending it's about the food is itself a piece of information. I filed it away and went to sleep. The following 2 weeks were surface normal. Marcus was slightly cooler, slightly careful in the way of a man who has decided the situation was your fault, but is smart enough not to say it directly. I was pleasant and present, and I did not apologize, which was new, and I could feel him registering the absence of the apology like a sound he was waiting for that didn't come. His family texted him more than usual. I noticed this not because I was surveilling his phone, but because he would go quiet for a few minutes and then emerge from the silence with that particular expression, the "bet on your decency" expression. I had begun to find it tiring. Galina called me directly on the Thursday after the visit. I was at work and let it go to voicemail and listened to the message in my car at lunch. She was worried. She could tell something was wrong. She didn't want any hard feelings. She hoped I understood that she and the family just wanted to be close to Marcus and by extension to me, that it was how their family showed love. Her voice was warm and slightly wounded in exactly equal measure, and I recognized the combination. Warmth and wound as a compound instrument, played to produce a specific result. And I thought, she's good at this. Then I thought, she's had a lot of practice. I texted back, "Thank you for calling, Galina. All fine here. Take care," and left it at that. That weekend, Marcus told me his parents were thinking of visiting the following weekend. He told me on Saturday morning over coffee, framing it carefully, "I wanted to give you plenty of notice this time." I looked at him over my mug and thought about the phrase, "this time," its implication that the only problem before had been logistics, not the fundamental dynamic, not the absence of consultation, not the expectation that my home was available on demand to whoever his family decided to send. "Thank you for the notice," I said. "Are they staying here?" "Just the weekend," he said. "They don't want to be any trouble." And I thought, that phrase, that specific phrase, "they don't want to be any trouble." The phrase that is always deployed by people in the process of being tremendous trouble. I said, Marcus, I'd like us to talk about this. Actually talk about it. Not just the parents next weekend. The whole pattern. I think we need a real conversation about how we handle family visits. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had been hoping for a different sentence. Okay, he said, without warmth. We tried. I want to give that 2 hours its due. We sat at the kitchen table and I said what I'd been holding for months, specifically and without accusation, in the measured cadences of a woman who had been trained professionally to communicate about hard things. I said that I loved his family, that I valued our connection to them, and that I needed our home to be a place I could count on coming home to, not a venue that might contain anything on any evening. I said that I wasn't asking him to cut anyone off or change who his family was. I was asking for consultation, for advance notice, for the basic courtesy of being treated as a co-owner of the space we shared. He listened. He nodded in some places. He said he understood. He said he'd do better. He reached across the table and took my hand, and I looked at his hand over mine and tried to determine whether I believed him. I wanted to. That's the honest answer. I wanted very much to believe him, because the alternative, that the conversation we had just had would produce the same outcome as all the previous conversations, was a conclusion I wasn't yet ready to sit with. So I chose to believe him, the way you choose to believe a weather forecast when you really need the day to be clear, with effort, with hope, and with a small practical voice in the back of your mind noting that you should probably pack an umbrella anyway. His parents came the following weekend. They were perfectly pleasant, as they always were, and I cooked on Saturday evening and we had a nice dinner, and Marcus was warm and attentive in the way he was when things were good, and I thought, maybe this is what the conversation produces. Maybe it actually worked. On Sunday morning, I woke at 7 to the sound of a third voice in the kitchen. Not his mother, not his father. A voice I recognized after a moment as belonging to Marcus's cousin Andre, who lived 30 minutes away and had apparently called Marcus the night before to say he was driving through, and Marcus had said, "Come for breakfast," and had not mentioned this to me. I lay in bed and listened to the three of them talking in my kitchen, and I thought, very clearly and very calmly, there it is. I was not angry yet. What I felt was closer to sorrow, the specific sorrow of a hope being confirmed as unfounded. I had given him the clearest possible account of what I needed. He had understood it, agreed to it, and then the first time an opportunity arose to practice it, had reverted entirely to the prior pattern without apparently thinking about it at all, which meant either that the conversation had genuinely not registered or that it had registered and he had decided that registering was sufficient without requiring any actual change in behavior. Both possibilities were bleak. One was thoughtless. The other was something worse. I got up. I went to the kitchen. I said good morning to Andre, who was a perfectly nice person and bore no responsibility for his cousin's choices. I made myself coffee. I excused myself to go for a run. I ran for 45 minutes in the park 3 blocks east, the park I had known before Marcus, and I thought about what my life looked like from the outside and what it felt like from the inside, and how wide the gap between those two views had become. When I got home, Andre was gone, and Marcus was washing dishes, and he turned around and looked at me with the expression that had replaced the bet on your decency expression, something slightly more apprehensive, the look of a man who is beginning to understand that the account he has been drawing on may be close to empty. I forgot to mention Andre was coming, he said. I know, I said. It was just breakfast. Marcus, I said. I was still in my running clothes, hair pulled back, probably still slightly flushed from the cold. I'm going to shower. When I come out, I'd like to talk. Not about Andre specifically, about what happens now. He said, What do you mean, what happens now? I said, I think we have a problem that's bigger than logistics, and I think we need to decide together whether we're going to solve it. Actually solve it, not discuss it and then return to default. I went to shower, and while the hot water ran over me, I thought about the list of options in front of me, and I thought about which one I could live with, and I thought about the word that had been forming in my mind for 3 months, gathering mass, the word I had been circling without letting myself land on it. The word was enough. The shower conversation, the one I'd promised and he'd been dreading, happened at the kitchen table again. Same chairs, same mugs, same window looking out at the street below. But something about the quality of the light was different that Sunday. Harder, maybe. Less forgiving. Or perhaps I was just different, and light is neutral, and I had been projecting warmth onto it all along. I told Marcus I needed him to understand something that I had perhaps not communicated with sufficient directness before, and that the reason I hadn't was that I had been operating under the assumption that softening the edges of a true thing made it easier for someone to accept. What I had learned was that softening the edges just made it easier to ignore. So I was going to say it directly. Your family treats our home like a hotel, I said. Not maliciously, I don't think they mean harm, but the effect is the same regardless of intent. I come home not knowing who will be there. I don't get consulted about guests. When I express discomfort, I'm described as cold or unwelcoming. And when we discuss it, you agree with me, and nothing changes. I held my coffee mug in both hands. That's not a logistics problem. That's a priorities problem. And the priority that's consistently losing is me. Marcus was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not thoughtful, but defensive. The silence of someone sorting through available responses, looking for one that might diffuse without conceding. Finally, he said, "My family is important to me." "I know that," I said. "They've always been like this. It's how they are." "I know that too," I said. "My question is whether how they are is compatible with what I need, and whether that's something you want to work on, or whether it's something you've decided is simply fixed, that this is how your family operates and I need to adjust to it." He looked at me. "I don't think it's fair to make me choose." "I'm not asking you to choose between me and your family," I said. "I'm asking you to choose between two versions of our marriage. One where I'm a full partner whose needs have equal weight, and one where I'm managing around your family's access to our space indefinitely and pretending it's fine." I set my mug down. "Those are the two options. I'd like to know which one you're choosing." The silence that followed was longer than the first one. Outside, a bus went past. Someone's dog barked twice and stopped. Marcus looked at the table, and I looked at Marcus, and I felt, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that I was about to find out something I had not known for certain until this moment. He said, "I don't think you're being reasonable." There it was. Not, "I hear you and I want to do better." Not, "You're right and I've been taking you for granted." Not even a negotiation, a counteroffer, an attempt to meet somewhere in the middle. Just, "I don't think you're being reasonable." Which was not a response to what I'd said. It was a verdict on the person who had said it. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he repeated. "I needed to know where you stood," I said. "Now I do." I got up and rinsed my mug and went to the bedroom and called my friend Natasha, who had been hearing my version of this story in installments for 8 months and who answered on the second ring with the specific alertness of someone who has been waiting for this call. "Tell me," she said. And I did. Natasha had a spare room. She offered it before I had finished the second paragraph of my account, in the decisive, no-nonsense way of a woman who has watched a friend diminish gradually and has been preparing her response. I told her I wasn't ready to move, that I needed a few days to think, that I wasn't going to make decisions in the hot wash of the Sunday morning conversation. She said, "Fine, but the offer stands and it doesn't expire." What I did instead of moving immediately was something I had learned in 3 years of working with children and families who were navigating crisis. I documented. Not aggressively, not with hostility, just carefully. I wrote down the dates and details of the last 6 months of uninvited visits. I noted the conversation Marcus and I had had about the pattern and the Andre breakfast the following morning. I wrote down what Marcus had said to me that Sunday. "I don't think you're being reasonable." I kept the notebook in my bag. I also called my father that evening. My father, unlike Marcus's family, called before he visited, usually 2 weeks in advance, always framing it as a question rather than an announcement. He was a retired accountant with a quiet manner and a talent for identifying the structural problem beneath the surface problem. When I told him what was happening, the full version, not the softened one, he listened without interrupting and then said, "The apartment is yours." Not a question, a confirmation. "Yes," I said. "You bought it before the marriage?" "Yes." "And the mortgage is in your name?" "Yes. We've been splitting costs since he moved in, but the deed and the mortgage are mine." "Good," he said. Quietly, practically, the word landing like something being set firmly on a table. "Keep that in mind." I did. The week that followed had the strange, over-vivid quality of days you know are going to matter. Marcus and I moved around each other with the careful politeness of two people who have said real things and are waiting to see what the real things produce. He did not bring up Sunday's conversation. He did not apologize. He was not unkind, just absent in the way of a man who has retreated into his routines as a form of defense, doing the dishes, watching his shows, going to work, keeping to the shallow register of daily life where nothing important could be said or decided. I went to work and saw my patients, and came home and made dinner and ate it, and cleaned up and thought every evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the amber light coming through the west-facing windows, how long can I do this? Not as a dramatic question, genuinely, practically. How long can I maintain this version of my life before it costs me something I can't get back? On Thursday, Galina called again. This time, I answered. "Clara," she said, warm and immediately purposeful, "I've been thinking about you. Are you and Marcus all right?" "We're navigating some things," I said, which was true and revealed nothing. "I spoke to him," she said, and something in my chest went tight. "He's very hurt, you know. He feels like you've been pulling away from the family, like you don't want us around." I held the phone and breathed. "Galina," I said, "what did Marcus tell you?" "Just that things have been difficult lately, that you've been unhappy about family visits." "Did he tell you that he and I had a conversation last Sunday about what I need from our marriage?" A slight pause. "He mentioned there had been some tension. Did he tell you what I said during that conversation?" Another pause. "He said you felt the family visited too much." "I said," I told her very calmly, "that I needed to be consulted before guests came to our home. I said I needed to be treated as a partner in this marriage. Those are the things I said." I paused. The fact that Marcus summarized that as me not wanting the family around is itself informative. Galina was quiet for a moment. Then, in a slightly different tone, still warm, but with something underneath it that was harder, a note of authority that her warmth had been covering the way a tablecloth covers an unfinished table. "Clara, you married into a family. That means adjustments." "Yes," I said, "it means adjustments from everyone, including me, which I have been making, and including Marcus, which he has not." "He loves you very much." "I believe that," I said. "Love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive." She said, "You know, it would mean a great deal to all of us if you came to the family dinner on Saturday. It might help smooth things over." I noticed the word smooth. The way it implied that the surface was what needed work, not the structure beneath it. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thank you for calling, Galina." I hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet office, the afternoon light fading outside the window, and thought, Marcus called his aunt before he talked to me again. He went to his family with our conflict before he came to me with an apology, which meant that whatever sorting he was doing in his private internal life, He was sorting it in their direction, not mine. He was triangulating, bringing his family into our marriage to manage a conflict that existed in our marriage, because managing it with his family present was something he knew how to do, and managing it alone with me was something he apparently did not. I drove home that night and did not stop for a sandwich. I was not hungry. I sat in the parking lot outside our building for 15 minutes instead, looking at the lit windows on the third floor. Our windows, amber and warm. And I thought about the life on the other side of those windows, and whether it was still the life I had planned to live. Inside, Marcus was making dinner. He'd made pasta, my preferred kind, and there was a glass of white wine on the table at my place, and he looked up when I came in with an expression that was a tempting warmth but running slightly thin at the edges, like paint applied over a surface it wasn't quite sticking to. "Galena called me," he said. "She said you talked." "We did," I said. I put my bag down and hung up my coat. She thought the Saturday dinner might be a good idea, a chance to— "Marcus," I said. I sat down at the table. "Did you tell your aunt about our conversation before you spoke to me again about it?" He was quiet. "Because I want to understand the sequence," I said. "We have a conversation Sunday morning where I tell you what I need. You say I'm being unreasonable. Monday through Thursday, you speak to your aunt about it. She calls me Thursday to suggest I come to a family dinner to smooth things over." I looked at him steadily. "At what point in that sequence did you plan to come back to me?" His jaw tightened. "I was thinking about it. You were managing it," I said, "with your family, which is what you always do. You don't bring it to me, you bring it to them, and then they come to me with a solution that happens to involve me being more available to them." I picked up the wine glass and held it. "That's not a marriage, Marcus. That's a system I happen to be living inside of." He sat down. For a moment, he just looked at me. And what I saw in his face was not the bet on your decency expression, and not the apprehensive one. What I saw was something raw, and I want to be fair. I think it was genuine. I think he looked at me in that moment and saw, perhaps for the first time clearly, the gap between what he'd been offering and what I'd needed, and the length of time that gap had been open. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought he might say the thing that could have changed the direction we were moving. He said, "I don't know how to make you happy." I put the wine glass down. "I know," I said. And that was the saddest thing I said in the whole conversation, because it was true, and because it was not an accusation, but a diagnosis, and because I understood in that moment that not knowing how to make me happy and not being willing to try were, for Marcus, functionally the same thing. I ate the pasta. It was good. I told him so. We watched something on television, and I went to bed, and he came to bed later, and we lay in the dark like two people who have run out of sentences, which is its own kind of answer. The family dinner was Saturday. I did not go. I told Marcus Friday evening that I was going to pass on it, that I had some things I needed to take care of, and I hoped he had a good time. He looked at me for a long moment and then nodded once, the nod of a man who has lost the argument but isn't ready to say so, and went without me. I heard him leave at 6:15, and I sat in the quiet apartment and felt the specific peace of a space that was, for a few hours, only mine. I called Natasha. I called my father. I made tea and sat in the armchair, the one I'd carried up 3 flights, and looked at the amber light, which had no loyalty to anyone and was simply itself. And I let myself think the thought I had been circling for weeks. I wanted him to leave. Not out of hatred, not out of desire for revenge or the satisfaction of punishment. I wanted him to leave because I was 34 years old and I had built a good life that I was good at living, and somewhere in the course of a marriage that had seemed like abundance and had turned out to be a slow dispossession, I had lost the particular quality of ease I'd had in this apartment before he moved in, and I wanted it back. I wanted to come home to a space that was mine and know that it would be mine when I arrived. I wanted to make a cup of tea without doing math about who else might be here. I wanted the dish cabinet and the bathroom and the armchair and the west-facing windows in the late afternoon to be simple again, to be just what they were and not a negotiation. I wanted my life back. And sitting in the quiet apartment on a Saturday evening, while my husband ate dinner with the family that had eaten mine, I understood that wanting it was not enough. I would have to do something about it. I spoke to a lawyer on Monday. My father had a name. He always has a name, my father, because he has spent his life in the quiet, thorough way of cautious people, collecting information in case it becomes useful. And I called from my car at lunch and explained the situation and was given an appointment for Wednesday. Her name was Vera Sokolova, and she had the precise, unsentimental manner of someone who deals in facts rather than feelings, and respects you enough not to pretend the facts are comfortable. I brought the documents I'd assembled, the deed in my name, the mortgage papers, the spreadsheet of shared household expenses I had been keeping for the past 2 years without entirely knowing why. She went through them efficiently and then looked up and said, "You've been thorough." I said, "I've been careful." She nodded as though those were the same thing and explained my position. The apartment was mine, legally, unambiguously, documented in every relevant way. Marcus had no claim to it. Our financial entanglement was limited to the shared accounts we had opened for joint expenses, accounts that would need to be addressed but contained no significant assets either of us would dispute. The situation was, in legal terms, clean. What it would not be was easy or fast or comfortable. "Are you certain?" she asked before we went any further. "I've been certain for 3 weeks," I said. "I've been waiting to make sure the certainty was real and not just reactive." She nodded again. "Then let's talk about what comes next." What came next began on Friday evening. Marcus came home from work at 6:30. I was in the kitchen, not cooking, which was the first thing he noticed. The absence of dinner, the cold stove, me sitting at the table with my hands around a cup of tea and a folder on the surface in front of me. He looked at the folder and then at me, and something in his posture shifted, the way a person's body adjusts before the mind fully processes what it's looking at. "Sit down," I said, not unkindly, just directly. He sat. I told him what I had decided. I told him that I had spent 6 months trying to have a conversation that would produce a different outcome, and that the conversation had produced the same outcome each time, and that I understood now that this was not a failure of communication, but a reflection of our actual incompatibility. I told him that I wanted him to move out. I told him the apartment was mine and had always been mine, that I was not asking him to leave my life. That was his choice to make, but that I was asking him to leave my home. I told him I had spoken to a lawyer, that the process was straightforward, and that I wanted to handle it with dignity and as little damage as possible. He listened. He was very still. When I finished, he said nothing for a long moment, and then he said, "Is this because of my family?" I thought about how to answer that. "It's because of us," I said finally. "Your family is the place where us became visible. But the problem isn't your aunt or Dimitri or Galina. The problem is that I have been telling you what I need for months, and you have consistently chosen not to hear it. Not because you're a bad person, because hearing it would have required you to do something difficult, and doing something difficult where your family is concerned is something you're not able to do. And I cannot build a life with someone who is not able to do that." He said, "You could have tried harder." "I tried for 6 months," I said. "I tried with conversations and with patience and with adjustments and with giving you the benefit of the doubt when the doubt had run out. I am done trying in a direction that doesn't go anywhere." I paused. "I don't want to fight about this. I'm not angry. I'm just finished." He looked at me for a long time. His face was doing several things at once: grief and anger, and the specific wounded pride of a man who has been told a thing he cannot argue against. Then he stood up, pushed his chair back, and went to the bedroom. I heard the sounds of things being moved, the wardrobe opening. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, which had gone cold, and listened to my husband pack a bag. He left that night to stay at his brother's. He kissed my forehead at the door, which surprised me, and said, "I'm sorry I wasn't better." And I looked at him and thought, me too. I genuinely thought, me too. The weeks after that had a strange quality, sad and quiet, and also, underneath the sadness, something that kept presenting itself when I wasn't guarding against it. Relief. It arrived in the mornings first. I would wake up and the apartment would be still, and the light would come through the west-facing windows in its amber way, and I would lie in bed for a moment and know, with the clean certainty of something restored, that nobody was going to come through the door today without my prior knowledge. That the kitchen was mine, and the bathroom cabinet was mine, and the armchair and the linen closet, and the Saturday mornings were mine. It was a small thing in the way that breathing is a small thing. Unremarkable when present, its absence the whole world. Galena called, as I knew she would. She called 3 times in the first 2 weeks, and on the third call, I answered. She was upset in a way that was not entirely performed. There was real distress in her voice, the distress of a woman who had watched a family she loved contract around a conflict she had contributed to creating. I let her speak. When she finished, I said, "Galena, I want you to know that I hold nothing against you personally, but I need you to understand that what happened between Marcus and me was not about a dinner or a visit or any one incident. It was about a pattern that Marcus and I couldn't resolve together. That's between us. Please don't take it as a statement about you." She was quiet for a moment. Then, with a quietness that I think was genuine, "I think we did ask too much of you." It cost her something to say that. I could hear it. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." We haven't spoken since, which is probably what's needed for now. Marcus and I reached our legal resolution in 8 weeks, as Vera had predicted. He was not unreasonable about it. That surprised me, in a good way, and made me think that the version of him I had once believed in was not entirely fictional, just insufficient for the life I needed. He took what was his, and I kept what was mine, and we signed the papers on a Wednesday morning in Vera's office and walked out into the cold streets separately, going in different directions, which is also its own kind of answer. My father came to visit the second weekend of March. He drove 4 hours, arrived at noon, parked in the right parking spot because I had texted him which one was free, and knocked on my door instead of having a key, because I had not yet given him one. When I opened the door, he looked at me for a moment, taking inventory in the way he does, the way he has always done, measuring whether the person in front of him matches the voice he has been hearing on the phone. And then he said, "You look well." "I am," I said, surprisingly. "Not surprisingly," he said, and came inside. We cooked together that afternoon, the way we had when I was growing up, him handling the parts that required precision, me handling the parts that required intuition, both of us moving around each other in a kitchen with the easy efficiency of people who have been doing this together for decades. He replaced a hinge on the kitchen cabinet that had been loose for months. He asked about my patients, and I told him about Ethan, who had had a breakthrough the week before that had made his mother cry in my office. And my father listened with the full attention he has always given to things I tell him about my work. When we sat down to eat, he looked around the apartment. The amber light, the armchair, the Lisbon painting back on the wall where I had rehung it, and said, "It looks like you." "It does now," I said. He nodded once, the nod of a practical man who understands that some statements don't require elaboration. It's been 4 months since Marcus moved out, long enough to have settled into a shape, the new life, long enough for it to feel like mine rather than like a temporary arrangement I'm borrowing until something more permanent arrives. My mornings are quiet. My evenings are mine to plan. I have had Natasha for dinner twice, and my colleague Remo once, and my father every other weekend. And each time someone comes through my door, it is because I have chosen it, because I have said yes, because the invitation was mine to give. I am not without sadness. I want to be honest about that. Because the story of the woman who reclaims her life and finds that everything is better and simpler and freer afterwards is not entirely the story I'm living. I miss certain things. Not many, but some. The sound of another person in the apartment on a Sunday morning. The ease of early love before it revealed its limits. The version of Marcus that had been possible in a different life with a different inheritance. I mourn those things at odd moments, in the way you mourn things that were always a little theoretical, with something that is not quite grief and not quite regret, but lives in the neighborhood of both. What I don't mourn is the 6 relatives on the couch. What I don't mourn is the 3 mugs set out by automatic reflex. What I don't mourn is the smile that cost nothing and meant nothing, the one I wore like a tool. I have not worn that smile since. I went for a run last Saturday morning in the park 3 blocks east, the park I have known since before any of this. It was early enough to be cold, the kind of pale winter cold that makes the light look clean and particular. And I ran my usual loop and then sat on a bench for a few minutes before heading back, the way I sometimes do when I'm not in a hurry, which I often am not anymore. A dog came and put its head briefly against my knee and then moved on. 2 children argued about something and resolved it without adult intervention. The bakery on the corner was opening. I could smell it from the park. Bread and something sweet, the kind of smell that asks nothing from you and gives you something anyway. I sat there for a while. I wasn't in a hurry. The apartment would be there when I got back, amber lit, quiet, mine. Nobody would be in it that I hadn't invited. The cabinet hinge was fixed, the dish rack was where I kept it, the cedar blocks were in the linen closet, and the Lisbon painting was at the height I had chosen, and the door had my name on the lease, and the lock answered to my key. I got up and ran home. Some things, when you get them back, you understand for the first time how much they always cost. My ordinary life, the one I had before, the quiet street, the good light, the park, the bakery, the amber evenings, had not been ordinary at all. It had been something I'd built carefully, over years, and given away piece by piece in the belief that love required it. It does not. Love, the real kind, the kind worth keeping, does not ask for the thing you are. It works around the thing you are. It learns its way through the space you occupy without rearranging you to fit. I am learning, again, to occupy my own space without apology. It is going well. The door has my name on it. That is where I will leave this story, with that small, sufficient, entirely real fact. The door has my name on it, and I came home. Would you like the tone made sharper and more confrontational for the climax scenes, or do you prefer this quieter, more introspective register throughout?